I used to think of as just a sign that I wasn't coping. And with that also, maybe a sign that I wasn't cut out for this, that I shouldn't be in these high stakes situation, because obviously I wasn't the kind of person who could handle high pressure.
I'm like, I'm never going to stop crying, so I better just start. I was thinking, the patients will just think someone died or something. Not that I just had a meltdown that I'm very ashamed of.
I have so many people come to me and they're like, I'm just a teary person. Like, it's just my personality. And I'm like, no, like shaking you, like, don't describe this thing that you see as a weakness as a fixed personality defect. It's not.
Whenever there's a crisis, whenever you're feeling a bit off, we just put the kettle on and make a cup of tea. And I'm talking about cardiac arrest. Let's put the kettle on. Do you know what I'm saying? Let's have tea. Emergency tea. I know that I've offered tea to people and they just looked at me like, what is wrong with you? Why would tea help me in this situation?
Hello, my beautiful friends. My name is Dr. Beck.
And I am Christine Barker, and this is Am I Doing It Wrong? A podcast for doctors by doctors. Every week on the pod, we'll be bringing you conversations which shine light in dark places, normalise the doctor journey, ease unnecessary suffering, and give you actionable steps to thrive in all facets of your life. So grab a cuppa and get cozy for this week's episode of Am I Doing It Wrong?
So hello again, welcome back to another episode of The Poddy. We are so excited for today's episode and I think that you're really going to find a lot of value here. So if you are working as a doctor human, you're probably going to resonate with challenging situations that challenge your emotions. You might have had situations that made you teary along the way on the wards in clinic or various other places in your life. And also we have these ongoing challenges of, exams and interviews and presentations and all the things. I think, to really be honest, like as a doctor human, there are always things that are coming up in our day-to-day, week-to-week that do challenge us in this way and spark all sorts of emotions like anxiety, teariness, worry. And so we are going to be talking today about how to best position yourself when you're in these situations where you do have something challenging coming up or you find yourself in one of those challenging moments, how to help you to stay in control of your energy and to ultimately get through that in a way that's helping you to achieve all of your goals. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. So grab a cuppa, and I can't wait to jump into this conversation with you, Beck. So Beck, this was something that came up in, was it Dear Darling this week? And then obviously we have lots of examples from life at large, but yeah, what sparked this off?
Yes, it did. It came up in Dear Darling. It was one of those moments that was like a nod from everybody, a collective understanding of, oh, we know that place. We know that place. And if you're somebody who identifies as a crier, I identify as a crier. Well, I used to identify as a crier. That little bit that you mentioned, Christine, where you're like, you don't want to go into this hard situation. Not because of necessarily the situation itself, but because you don't trust, you don't know that you'll be able to hold back the tears in that situation. And it doesn't even have to be some like big, dire, really serious situation, but just these little moments of disagreement or getting disapproval from somebody, having to tell somebody something that they don't want to hear, having to, push back and ask that person, no, I know that you don't think you need to see the patient, but I need you to see the patient and here's why. Those little moments that, we see them as little moments. And yet we see ourselves responding with this teariness. We know from our experience that those tears are going to bubble up. So this is going to be important and life-changing for not just those difficult moments clinically and personally. We've all got difficult conversations to be had personally too. But also if you've got like that difficult situation Christine was talking about coming up, if you've got an interview coming up, a talk, a presentation that you want to go well, that you want to do yourself justice in, that you want to do your work justice in, if you've got an exam coming up and you can see yourself getting wound up and having a lot of stress in the preparation period, and yet you know that you need to be feeling good and calm and grounded on the day to perform well, that's what we're talking about. That crying, I used to think of as just a sign that I wasn't coping. And with that also, maybe a sign that I wasn't cut out for this, that I shouldn't be in this high stakes situation, because obviously I wasn't the kind of person who could handle high pressure. And I think about that situation, this crying, this bubbling up of the tears in these high pressure situations totally differently now. So it's not something that reveals whether you're somebody who can handle stress or not, or something inherent about your personality or not. But actually, what I realized over time was, well, not over time, but with self-reflection, with coaching, was that crying is a very masterful response to the energy that was building up in my body that could no longer be contained, that was accumulating and accumulating and accumulating, because I, like a lot of doctors and anybody who experiences that situation of teariness, even in what you would call small situations, this is just a mismanagement of our energy. And that crying is your body's natural way of managing the energy.
I absolutely love this because I can resonate so much with this. What you said before about not wanting to go into a situation because you don't trust yourself not to be teary. Like, I find that even now as a consultant, obviously I'm much better at it now, but I still, like, if I know a patient and their family really well, if I was going in at someone's, terminal event and I know those family members and I can see them all being upset, like, to think of me not having a tear in my eye, I think now I almost just accept that there will be something, but I actually think that having a tear in my eye is the very regulated response, because I have so much potential to just, not be able to speak and cry that much under those circumstances. So I resonate with this so much, and I think that obviously I recognize within myself that I have developed an ability to do something, but I'm curious as to, like, I don't remember a moment where I fixed it or I was able to, like, change it in any way. I think it was just ongoing experience. But that resonates so much. And also what resonates is that feeling of, like, I'm crying, therefore I must be weak. There must be something wrong with me. Like, I think so many of us can resonate with that. And so you framing this as a completely normal and actually masterful was the word you use, human response. I'm really excited for this conversation and how we're gonna really reframe something that we're probably quite ashamed of or, like, want to change about ourselves. And so, yeah, so I'm super curious, could you sort of give us an example of, like, maybe from your own life where, like, how do you actually navigate this? Because you said before that you no longer experience this. You no longer tear up in situations that used to make you teary. So I'm curious as to the journey with that. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, that's right. And actually, that's a really important distinction to make because, you've got this teariness that comes from this sort of like calm, like the teariness that comes from the emotion of sadness, that like the compassionate, soft, gentle sadness. That teariness, that's not what I want to talk about today in this context, because I personally, I know that a lot of people have been told that, emotions have no place in medicine, but we've talked about this in the podcast as well, Christine. I think it's a beautiful thing when a doctor is present with a human experience and they let that human experience move them, like an experience of somebody losing their loved one or their life dramatically changing because they've experienced a medical condition or event that creates some kind of disability. I think that's a beautiful thing. The teariness that I want to zoom in on today is almost like that point of decompensation, like when it's the teariness that is resultant from like an extreme stress response. I say extreme, you probably don't, as doctors, experience it as an extreme stress response because we're so used to having this level of like tension and energy in our body as we're like darting around doing this and that and this one emergency to the next thing, flip. We're so used to being on and being so wired just to get through our day in the hospital. So this teariness that I'm talking about is the teariness that comes from, it feels like the energy is pent up. Your nervous system, your stress response is just winding up. And then you get to this point, this moment in your day when, you've gotten to your limit and you're about to do the hard thing, you're about to have a conversation you don't want to have. You need to even just ask somebody to do something for you. But like there's a part of your brain that's like, oh, but like that's so rude of you to ask them. You should just do it yourself. And you're torn. You go to try or give that person, some hard feedback and you just feel like tearing up. There's no sort of obvious sad thought. It's just this like energy pouring out of you because like of that tension that's built up. So let me give you a probably relatable example just from my normal life. And I like this example because it shows the contrast between what was going on in my body and the actual reality. So I was just out trying to walk my dog with my baby yesterday morning. I'd gotten her to sleep, so she was in the pram, so I'd taken myself to a nearby cafe so I could sit down, have a coffee, and just I decided to cancel my credit card so I didn't have to pay another fee, because I guess I shouldn't say the name of the company, but I am unhappy with a few Australian companies who ain't doing the Australian people very good. Anyway, cancel my credit card without much forethought, and then I'm suddenly getting emails, bing, 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 bing. Hey, if you don't pay this bill and update your payment details by this date, we're going to cancel this service. Bing, bing, bing. And so I'm like, okay, I need to find some time to sit down and make sure my whole life doesn't like shut down around me because I'm not paying the bills. So I had this little fantasy that I'd sit down and just like quickly like whip through, these couple of emails that had come up while my little bee was sleeping, which can last anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour, hopefully. So it's a bit of like, I don't know how much time I've got. And as I tried to do just the first couple of payment update details, this page would crash, and then I didn't have this login, and then I put in all the details and it wouldn't let me hit submit. It just sit on that like taunting little, winding circle of maybe I'm going to submit all the information you just typed in manually. Maybe I won't. We'll see. So I'm like feeling myself getting progressively wound up as the time is passing. I'm looking at my little bee sleeping. The time is ticking. My little time bomb of love till when she wakes up, and I can no longer put my 2 hands on my laptop anymore. And then my sweet little Humphrey is sitting outside the cafe because he's not allowed to come inside, squeaking away because he just really wants my attention, because he's a little sweetheart lap dog that just wants to be with you at all times. And this is not a regular part of his walk routine, but just a little detour due to the sleeping and the credit card fussing. But here's the thing, not a high stakes situation. We can all agree, right? Especially because Christine has you thinking about, real high stakes situations in the hospital, in your career path, in your career expansion. Those moments that are sometimes trajectory changing. And yet I was feeling that stress bubble up in my body, even in this low stakes situation. And anybody looking at that situation would not suspect that I was stressed. And when you find yourself in like a Saturday morning situation like that, you probably would not go looking for stress. You probably wouldn't be expecting that you were stressed in that situation. I mean, you're a doctor. You've done incredibly hard things over and over and over again. You continue to in your life. Like, you're good at stress, aren't you?
But things that stress you out, right? Sorry to interrupt you, but things that stress you out don't have to be actual stressful things. Like when you were saying that about that scenario there, which obviously I'm interrupting your story, but I just kept thinking about like my pager. Like if my pager when I was a registrar would go off too much, if my phone went off too much, and it was just the ping, 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 it was just this feeling of everyone wanting me and that me finding that quite reactive and annoying. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, I think that it's not actually life or death, but for some reason my nervous system doesn't like that very much. So I just want to validate your experience also. Very relatable.
Well, that's right. And that's what I'm kind of hoping to that's why I'm using this really mundane situation to paint for everybody, because I guess where I'm going with this is if you don't suspect it and you don't therefore look for it, monitor for it, then you won't see it. So here's a little, a special little cognitive dissonance or conflict that kind of comes up that creates this problem of doctors of like the stress winding us up to the point that we're just like pouring tears out in an unexpected situation. Because we don't recognize the small amounts of stress, but still stress, that occur in, the trajectory of our day, whether it's a Saturday in a beautiful sunny cafe or it's a Saturday on one of those ridiculous shifts on call or at the hospital, in clinic, whatever it might be. If you don't notice that stress happening in your body, then you do not get a chance to stop it, to intervene on it, to do anything about it. And the thing about energy is a lot of the time, and hopefully as it works, if we can allow that energy to just do what it wants to do to move through us, then it will sort of self-resolve. The problem is though, in this situation for me, I was fixated on finishing this task. So I wasn't just letting the energy, the stress move me around. Like probably what I would have ideally like naturally done would be like get up and move my body as that stress started to build up and kind of move around my body. But I didn't, because I was fixated on finishing this task. So I sat myself at the computer despite the other stuff going on. I sat myself there and I was determined to finish, and I kind of overrode myself. I ignored, that stress signal. Same with doctors. We do this by necessity in terms of like all the stuff we've got to get through in the day, and not just the sheer number of things, but the fact that so many of the things that we do in our workday are urgent and they need to be done as soon as possible before this thing happens or this thing rolls on and we miss the boat for this and it creates this next consequence. So this creates a situation for doctors where we purposefully ignore those sort of early stress signs and that energy building up. We ignore it on purpose in the name of productivity, in the name of being effective in getting things done. And I think the other reason that we ignore it is because we underestimate that reaction. Just what we were saying, Christine, like we're like, well, we shouldn't have any kind of stress response to this situation, and therefore we don't acknowledge it. And so we override it just by virtue of, not acknowledging that it's there, and probably more to the point for doctors, not acknowledging that it's something that needs any kind of attention at all, because, we're people who deal with high stress all the time. We're fraught with high stress situations, which is true, but it doesn't mean you can defy the laws of how energy works and moves in your body and how that affects your nervous system. So that's why, Christine, I wanted to talk about this really mundane scenario in my life, because what we do in those moments where we identify or we don't identify those early levels of stress, like that's our first opportunity to stop us from getting to that point of so much stress that it's like now boiling up in us as tears. And also, if you're preparing for an important situation in the next couple of weeks to come, that's a moment where you are winding up your nervous system that will make it harder for you to perform really well in that high stakes situation.
Can I also just say, what's coming up for me, I'm thinking about this very specific scenario, because we sort of started talking about how some of this might be teariness, or just that kind of like, not teariness in the context of sadness, but teariness in an overwhelmed way. But I actually recognize in myself where this has not happened. It's happened maybe like 2 or 3 times in my career, so I can count the amount of times that I have snapped at a colleague.
Yeah.
But it was like what you were saying. It was like sleep deprivation plus stress, plus pecking, plus pecking, plus pecking. Then there'll just be one beautiful, well-intentioned human who comes up to me to ask me about it was, in this scenario, I'm thinking it was the pharmacist. You know how pharmacists are so particular, and that pharmacist just asked me a question at the wrong time, right? And I remember just like, I was like, it was something to the effect of, I don't really care, sort it out yourself, was kind of like, it was a meltdown, right? Very public meltdown. I obviously went back and apologized to the pharmacist after crying in the cupboard for 50 minutes. But it was like, and then after that, I went and I started my ward round whilst crying. Like once the tears came, like I was no longer I just had to do my ward round, because I'm like, I'm never going to stop crying, so I better just start. And I'm like, I was thinking, the patients will just think someone died or something, not that I just had a meltdown that I'm very ashamed of. So anyway, I just wanted to say that as well, because this kind of like ignoring things because it's too inconvenient to manage that little stress, or just being so conditioned to the fact that on a daily basis we are getting a stress response and there's cortisol in our veins at all times, it becomes our new normal. But then we just let that layer on until like a bomb goes off. And I think, and obviously like a female perspective, I resonate more with tears than I do with anger, but I think it's possible in both. And for anyone listening, I just wanted to sort of say that that's so relatable as well, that it's another consequence of this, that you don't want to get to that stage. And I wasn't self-monitoring, I was ignoring because I didn't know how to help myself. No, that's
totally it. It's just that point you've identified. It's just that snap, crack, break point, whether it's tears, whether it's snapping, whether it's anger, whatever it is. I think tears are probably the least recognizable as a sign of stress. Like I think we appreciate anger and snapping and that kind of directness as stress. And I think people misinterpret tears are some kind of like point of weakness, but it's all this same to me. Like, I want us to recognize that the tears in this situation and the snapping and the anger, it's all like endpoint stress response. It's all like, if stress is a scale of 0 to 5, like you're at the 5. You're at the 5, it's the end of the scale, and we are not meant to function as humans carrying around that level of stress. Like, we just can't. And it brings me to what I have since, recognizing and trying to solve that problem for myself of like not wanting to let myself get to that point of snapping or the teariness or, that performance point where like I've got an important performance. I guess I say that loosely, like whether it's, just giving, I used to give presentations and my voice would just be shaking. Like I'd be so wound up in the preparation for it because I didn't think I knew enough and it needed to be better and I needed to say this exact right way and I needed to have all these, I don't know, references and whatever prepared. Like I used to create so much stress in the preparation for that, but then all that preparation didn't matter in the end because I was just decompensating at that like 5 out of 5 or even just 4 out of 5 stress point. Like it's really hard to do something hard when you're at a 4 out of 5 on that stress scale. It's it makes a hard thing even harder, doesn't it?
Yeah. It's paralyzing, actually. It's paralyzing. And I can also like resonate with that feeling of when you're so stressed, it's almost like your frontal lobe just like shuts down.
Yes.
You're like,
Yeah.
I
think of it like
I can't do anything now.
Yeah, it's like a hijacking, I feel. Like that's the experience I have. It's like a hijacking of my control center. So, I've like realizing that link, realizing that I'm not just like some teary person. And for you, I feel like a snappy person. You're not just an angry person. Like anger is just not your personality, okay?
Unless you take me over the edge, in which case, definitely I'm that person. Really.
But I have so many people come to me and they're like, I'm just a teary person. Like, it's just my personality. And I'm like, no, like shaking you, like, don't describe this, like this thing that you see as a weakness as a fixed personality defect. It's not. This is a matter of us just not taking the attention and time to actually monitor and manage our own stress levels. Because like I said before, I wouldn't expect anybody to perform well if they're at a 4 or 5. I don't know, like the surgeons, their training just stretches them to the absolute flippin' limits of everything. And I'm sure there's other specialties, but surgery is the one that I have witnessed most closely in my life. And then they're asked to perform at that level of 4 or 5 stress. And it's just, it's miraculous that it happens. But what has become important to me and like just an amazing tool in my belt that I want you guys to have. And Christine, you do this intuitively as well. Like you've come on this same path and you're like, that's not okay. It's not acceptable for me to show up in that way. I will not snap at a pharmacist one more time again in my life. One was too many for me. And then you investigate and you work out what's needed to change. And what's needed to change this is not to just like, be more disciplined to not cry. But what the solution is, at least from my perspective, is we need to actually acknowledge where we are on the stress scale and stop doing this thing where, we'll get to a 2, like I was in the cafe the other day, and just ignore that. And then from that stress state, take our stressed self into the next situation. We're already in frustration. We're already in time scarcity, overwhelm. And then the next challenge of the day happens. And then we keep that base of that frustration, overwhelm, and we stack another event, another stressor on top of it. And we go from a 2 to a 3. And then you get home, and it's dinner time with your partner and he asks you what you want for dinner and you just snap because you're like, why don't you decide dinner for once? Because you're at a 4 or 5, not because of the situation. So what we would like to offer you guys today is to think about this stress scale where, 0 is like perfectly neutral. You're just in this gorgeous, neutral, calm, grounded energy state. You feel that bliss stillness. And then 5 is that like totally hijacked, cannot function state of stress. You just like so wound up, like you can't move, like all this energy is like now almost rigid. Your body's so full of that energy, and like the teariness will come when your partner says, no, you pick dinner tonight. What we want you to do is not let your stress, your energy go beyond a 2, right? A 2 on the scale. So it's okay to like walk around a little bit stressed. It's okay to walk around a little bit more stressed. But when you notice yourself, like I did in the cafe the other day, getting myself a bit wound up, regardless of how low stakes the situation was, a bit wound up, that for me is a flag to be like, I'm not going beyond a 2, because I know that if I don't deal with this stress right now, if I allow myself to go up to a 3 or a 4, the rest of my day is going to be so much harder. My night, being able to sleep well is going to be so much harder. And therefore being able to wake the next morning, and therefore being able to do the hard thing that I had planned the next day, all of that's going to be harder if I let myself creep beyond a 2. Or, I guess more to the point, whenever you find yourself beyond a 2, like more like a 3 or 4, you don't actually stop and take yourself back to the 2. You make it your number one priority to get back to the 2 anytime you notice yourself deviating out of that. Does that make sense, Christine?
It does, but I'm kind of thinking, like, how do I get there? Like, if I'm thinking about, all right, well, sometimes I'm either 4 or 5, this is where I don't want to be. And then maybe if I start to tune into myself and I know when I'm at 1 or 2, it's not actually intuitive to me that I'm going to end up in 4 or 5 and become some psycho freak out person. But I think I'm going to stay at 2 all day. But I don't have insight into, like, and also if I'm still in the clinical environment or whatever environment that's causing me that stress, or like if something's still true, like if I still have a presentation I haven't done yet and I'm going to have that anxious energy forever until I do that and get to the other side of it. Like, I guess I think it's a really clever concept, like the self-monitoring, but I'm wondering, like, what do I do when the stressful thing hasn't gone away yet?
Yeah, to kind of close the loop. I was saying that, I look at crying completely differently now. And I did, in the same way as you, Christine, used to experience crying as like, oh my goodness, I'm not coping, or even seeing somebody else and be like, well, they're not coping with the situation. Now I see it completely differently. I see crying as like that kind of crying, that kind of bubbling up, boiling over crying as like they're just holding a lot of energy in their body. That's what I see. That's what it is. It's not that they can't handle that situation. It's that they have found themselves in that situation with a lot of energy in their body. And that energy is now like bubbling over. It's bubbling over. And with that, I recognize, and I've learned over the years of working towards using these emotional mastery tools, that crying is actually the most productive, fast, effective way to actually deal with that energy. When your body's wanting to cry, that's probably the best path forwards to cry. I'm not advocating for crying in the clinical situation, although it is okay if that happens. But if that matters to you, if that bothers you, crying in a clinical situation, then what you probably need first is to let yourself cry in the non-clinical situation, to let yourself cry after work in different spaces, with safe spaces with your friends and family and loved ones, or even by yourself, if you can hold that space for yourself. Because crying is an incredible way to move that energy. My most common response if I find the tears boiling up now is like, oh great, I'm crying. I've got this energy to let out that, like, I'm so glad it's getting out of my body. I'm so glad I'm doing it here in this controlled space. And I'm so glad that it didn't sneak up on me and it didn't just like surprise me in a later scenario. And that is in part because I'm not trying to resist it. I'm not trying to stop myself from crying in, any random moment of my day, because I am now, circling back to what you said, Christine, I'm not so terrified of crying because I will make it mean that I'm not coping. So crying, it's not a sign that you're not coping with a stressful situation. It's not a sign that there's something wrong with your personality or you're just such an emotional person. Crying is a sign that you're holding a lot of energy in your body. A really great tool for managing all that energy in your body is crying, letting yourself cry. So it's a totally different look on crying that I don't think I've ever heard somebody talk about before, but it's totally changed my life. And ironically, as I was saying, after all of this, I'm just not a teary person anymore. I used to literally cry in difficult situations, like even difficult conversations, like even just a conversation with my partner. I'd like find myself crying and be like, why can't I speak? And that doesn't happen to me anymore because I don't judge myself for crying. I use crying as an energy management tool. And also I watch that, like I try and keep myself in about 1 to 2 on the stress scale. And when I monitor myself and find myself creeping out, I bring myself back, sometimes with crying. So that was a bit of a long spiel, Christine, but I just wanted to make sure I snuck that in because there are a lot of us who are judging ourselves as emotional people and finding ourselves crying in these clinical scenarios where we don't want to be. And I would love for you to be able to see that in this totally different light.
I love that. And also don't feel bad if you're like still going over the edge. It happened to me like about 4 days ago. Like
Oh
as in
yeah,
with my
me
partner.
too. Yeah.
So.
I know
Just
the edge well.
throwing that in
Yes.
there.
Yeah.
No judgment. No judgment. Yeah.
I guess, yeah, you're allowed to, just again, the 4 and the 5 isn't bad, but it's like if you don't want to be there all the time, you can like monitor yourself in general in that 1 to 2 space. Yeah, the self-monitoring it is a practice. It is something you have to actually insert and integrate into your life. There are some kind of easier things that you can do, firstly, from the self-monitoring perspective, like simple things like, I don't know, people say like setting alarms to check in with how you feel, but that's obviously not particularly practical in the clinical day. And I don't know about you, but my brain just adapts really quickly to those alarms. If I'm like, if I had like a silent alarm on my phone, but I'm actually opening my phone to go and look up some guideline or something, I will just ignore the alarm and like go and get my work done because that's what my brain wants to do at the time. But there are moments like in a doctor's day, for example, the last time I was in the hospital, I remember I'd walk myself outside for lunch and I was going to eat some food. And I think I practiced sort of like mindful eating over time because I know that eating is like a time where you are kind of more easily connected with your body. And I notice if I eat when I'm a bit stressed, the whole experience is really different. Like I can't even taste my food as much, or like I'm chewing in like a really kind of a weird, like mechanical way. I don't know if this makes any sense to you, but I would highly encourage you to use something like, these checkpoint moments in your day. You don't have to be constantly monitoring yourself, but something like a lunch break, or a time where you go and get your coffee, after the round or something like that. Or you might have a break in patients, like a did not show us something in clinic. These moments that you have to yourself are the place that I'd start, to just actually take a minute to check in with your body and notice where you're at. And you might not be able to pick up on an emotion, but just broadly, you can notice like, am I holding a tension in my body? Am I feeling any kind of like low grade fluttering in my chest? That's how I often feel like a level like 2 stress, I'd say, is like I can feel a little bit of like a buzzing, a fluttering in my chest. And maybe a level 3 is more like now that it's starting to become a tension, like I'm holding some tension in my body as I'm walking around. So little cues like that help you just easily identify where am I on the scale, and therefore is this a moment when I should prioritize, when my number 1 priority should be getting back to a 2, or am I good to continue on? So for example, in the cafe the other day, I said I was a 2, but I guess the point is I was probably more like a 3, and I came back to a 2 because I did start to notice that tension in my chest. And I'm smiling right now because the first thing I did when that tension came into the chest was I laughed at myself, which is a very idealistic response, but I have practiced this over time, guys. But I laughed at myself acting this way in such a low stakes situation, finding myself all like spun out and wound up, being overwhelmed in this state. And laughing, it's one of those next step things that you can do, Christine, that I'd love to talk about with you next. So when you find that you have gone beyond a 2, you're at a 3 or 4 and you want to come back down, what are some sort of things you can do? And I know you have a lot to say about, energy management interventions. And we're not talking about going and like throwing some weights around or doing like a full yoga session, but things that you can actually do in your day to come back to a 2.
I love this so much. And can I just say, yeah, I live my life now from like a place where I'm tuning into my energy and always absolutely conscious of where I am. But I just wasn't always this way. So I guess I just say that because I totally relate to going through a little bit like disconnected. And I think before we came onto the podcast, Beck was actually saying how like a common theme that she sees working with doctors is that we do live in our heads and we're actually quite disconnected from our body and from our energy in terms of as concepts. Like we're making a lot of decisions and everything's very practical. Like I need to do. And so I think the doctor world is a logical world. And so it's like in terms of what's required from your brain, you're up here all day. And so I think also in these moments of having lunch or like sitting and having these little moments, it is kind of almost switching that into like how am I feeling is the question, and checking in with your body is what you're saying. But I think that is actually like quite a foreign concept when you get started. And the other reason that I really love talking about this is because I am absolutely fascinated with the notion now of doctors regulating their nervous systems, but not just for themselves, for the patients as well. So I think sometimes in my past, if I was listening to this conversation that we're having, I'd be like, oh, well, that's very nice for you, whatever. I'm in survival mode and I can't hear this right now. And I would just be in survival mode. But if you told past Christine, listen, if you had a better regulated nervous system, then that's going to improve your ability to actually look after patients and be more therapeutic, then I might have been motivated by that. So I wasn't necessarily motivated by helping myself very much, because I don't think I believed that was going to be possible. But anything to make me a better doctor, anything to make me more therapeutic, like that stuff is what motivates me. So I also say that just to like help people to connect with the why behind this. Obviously your well-being is paramount, but also it spills over. And so the intention that you set when you go to work, you're more likely to achieve it when you have a regulated nervous system. So that's one of the first things to say.
Yeah, and I'd add to that, even like if you are somebody who it's in your integrity to be a high performer and really reach your potential, this is also like foundationally important for that too. If you want to be somebody who can, to be a high performer, it's all about doing hard things, the way you show up in hard moments. And you can't ask yourself to do that if you're living at like a 4 or 5 in the stress scale all the time. And this is the thing, like, that situation I was describing when I came out of the hospital and I noticed that fluttering in my chest and the tension, I wouldn't have usually identified that before. I wouldn't have cared about, who cares if like I notice this little bit of a stress response, but it's reverse engineering what I want. And like for you, Christine, you're saying if you want to be somebody who really gives great patient care, and I'm saying if you want to be someone who's a high performer and does hard things and does them well, and also, if you're just somebody who wants to be well and cares about how you feel, that's why it matters that if you're at just a 3 or even a 2 at the stress scale. That's why it matters, because as you're saying, Christine, you just end up at a 5, like out of nowhere, because you're not monitoring your body. So this is like, you want to just brush it off as like, oh, this little bit of stress, like it doesn't matter because I can handle it. But the point is that becomes an easy stepping stone to that place that you suddenly do get hijacked and now you're not being the person that you want to be.
Yeah. And I think in terms of what you were saying about how you actually kind of regulate your energy, like if you're having, I guess I'm just thinking about someone who's having a clinical day. It's not like you're in your house or you can just like go for a very long walk and there's no one pestering you or like trying to get things from you still. Even in the hospital, you go for lunch, someone will page you, someone will call you. It's like a whole thing. Like it's hard to sort of control every parameter. So I guess there's kind of like in the day and then there's like when you go home, and I think they are 2 different places to process, because you can take those emotions with you and process them later. But I think in the moment, because I think there's a lot of mindfulness stuff that goes around that I think sounds like a lot of work, like I really have to try. But I think one thing that really helps me is literally just sitting on grass or like outside. Like you have to do anything. You just literally go and you sit. And maybe you're eating your lunch, maybe you're talking to somebody, maybe you're just breathing, I don't know, do whatever you want to do. But I think just actually like sitting in an outdoor environment I think it's like an absolute cheat code. And laughter, obviously you said that is also a cheat code, but I'm just thinking of someone who's by themselves with nothing really funny to stimulate them. Like I think going outside, like I swear I'm solar powered, like I don't have the right skin type for it at all, but I know that when I'm in deep distress of some sort, I will go and just lie on the grass outside my house and be like, it just helps. So I think like using things that don't require you to actually do anything or think or force yourself to be mindful or meditate. Obviously they're great if you're into it, but I think a lot of people they don't feel like they have that in their day.
Yeah, I would agree. I think we've got to recognize you've got to tailor the response, the tactic that you take to where you are in the stress cycle, because you can't, again, like you cannot ask somebody who's at like a 4 or a 5 to just sit down and meditate. I mean, you can, and you could discipline yourself to be able to do that. But how much resistance do we feel to being still when we've got that like feeling of energy in our body? And, I think there's a reason for that. I think, your body's wanting you to move in order to deal with that energy, in order to move that energy. So I guess a concept that I think is really fun and really will resonate with a lot of us is this concept of, I think it's called shaking it off. I'm just going to paraphrase a little bit, but there's a PhD, Dr. Emily Nagoski. She's done some work on burnout, and she has this concept of completing the stress cycle. And she talks about how we see in nature animals after they've had a stressful event, particularly if, they get all revved up and ready to fight because they see a threat. If they don't have that fight and therefore actually use that energy that their nervous system has mobilized for them in that threat response, you'll see them shake it off. Like, literally shake. You'll see animals shake that energy off that they didn't use, but they prepared and mobilized for that threat. And Dr. Emily suggests that we as humans do or consider using similar practices for ourselves. So if you're in those like higher stress states, you've gone beyond a 2, a 2 is probably a place for me where I'm not needing a shake it off. Like a 2 is a place for me where I can roll my shoulders back. I can let that energy move through my body without lifting a finger at all. And that energy can just do what it needs to do and leave. Right? That's the point. The point is to actually let that energy move and leave your body. But at this higher ends of the stress scale, to get back to a 2, maybe you do need to do some kind of shake it off. And it's kind of fun to like imagine a doctor just randomly in the hospital in a ward round, just like doing a bit of this. But I can understand where you're like, no thanks, Beck. I'd like something else. But, little similar things like a bit of like jumping and jiggling. Laughter, as we said, is, a great fun one. And that requires a little bit of masterful mind management to take yourself to a humorous place from a stress place. But if it's available, that's a great socially acceptable grab. Dancing, shaking, dancing, any kind of like movement that, you know what it feels like. You don't need it. If you tune into your body, you don't need me to prescribe this to you. You're like, what do I need to do? What would feel good when I'm in this stress state? And you can even just think about the fact that you're probably contracting a lot. So even just like you can see me kind of rolling and flapping my arms and moving my arms back because you're just kind of undoing that contracted state that's like holding all the energy in, pulling yourself back and opening yourself up so it can move in your body. Does that make sense, Christine? It's a bit of an esoteric kind of concept of like the energy moving through your body, but you know what I mean?
Oh, it resonates so much with me, and I think people will actually resonate with it. I think it is just like the time and place, isn't it? Because I know that I took up bachata dancing last year. I haven't been to class in a little while, but I know that like dancing is, and obviously the music as well. Like I think music also on its own can lift your mood and lift your energy, and then the dancing is a whole other thing. And I think I used to find my clinical day on a Tuesday when I did the dancing after work was like one of my hardest days of the week. There was just a lot going on, and I was up like start from 7:30 and finish real late, like a whole day clinic. And I used to kind of dread it, but then I started to look forward to it because I had this dancing attached, and it was like the antidote to that whole thing. And I think it was for multiple, there was socialization, there was laughter, there was music, there was movement, and it was amazing. It was like euphoric. And I don't think I did enough of that stuff. I still don't think I do enough of that stuff consciously, where I make choices in my week that are going to serve this like cleaning of my energy and like renewal of the energy, like not stuck in that stress thing. But also, can I just be super honest that see when I have got to a place where I've gone too far and I'm stressed and whatever, and I've gone up the scale, sometimes, even though I have many tools in the box, the only way that I can reset myself is to go for a nap or like a full sleep, become asleep and wake up and start again the next day. So I just want to be really real about that. It's not like I'm saying, oh, I'm overwhelmed and I'm so stressed, I think I'll just go and use these tools. Sometimes I do have to just start again tomorrow. Do you know what I mean?
That is exactly the point. Like, that is the point. If you let yourself get to like a 4 or 5, then your only choice at that point in most cases is going to be something more extreme, right? And something like making yourself unconscious, going to sleep, the crying, it's kind of the point. The point of this kind of awareness system is to not let ourselves get to a 4 or 5. And it's not that a 4 or 5 is bad and you should never be there. No, because we're humans and we will go there. sometimes for very purposeful reasons, because we're like, no, getting this thing done, doing this thing is more important, and I will pay the consequences. I'm going to accept that I'm just going to have to sleep or cry in this situation, whatever it is. Like, there's no right or wrong here. But what I really want everybody to see is this point of control and agency that you can get back in a place that you underestimate. Because when you underestimate and ignore, when you're creeping out of that like 1 or 2 and you're creeping towards a 3, you can make a choice here. Like, you still have control. When you notice yourself at like a 3 or even like early 4, you still have some control here to bring yourself back into that place where you're not accumulating and winding up, right? That's when you have control and choice. So we're just trying to offer you that monitoring system that gives you that option to go into a 4 or 5, or to not go into a 4 or 5 if you don't want to. But what we see is doctors underestimate the, levels 2 and 3. We don't even notice it happening. We don't think it matters. And we're telling you today it matters, right? Because number 3 is the gateway to number 4, which is the gateway to number 5. And if you don't do something when you're getting up to those higher scales, it's like a positive feedback system from there, because the next minor little challenge that you come across in your day when you're at like a level 3 or 4 can suddenly feel like a very big stressful event because of that stress lens, because that stress state that you're in and the way that you're in this hyper vigilant, highly threatened, defensive state.
Yeah, but can I also just say though, I think in doing this episode today, I'm trying to make sure that like what we say is useful to you when it finds you right where you are in the current system and the current culture that surrounds you and what's realistic, right? But there's also this part of me that it would be so cool if we had this more mainstream to recognize, I'm always going on about doctors and humans, and the human part of us is barely acknowledged or celebrated, but at the end of the day it exists, and it's the human part of us that has the cortisol and the adrenaline and all these emotions and all the things and has to deal with the doctor thing. And it's like our culture currently denies normal human physiology in a way. And so I actually would love to live in a world where we actually did say, do you know what? That ward round was really stressful. Let's go get coffee and we're going to shake it off in the coffee queue. And you just see like teams just shaking it off.
Who's
like,
feeling a 3?
You
Who's feeling a 4? Do we need a coffee?
Right?
Do we need a dance?
But how powerful, right? How powerful would that be to normalize it, or someone to say, listen, I just need to step away for just a minute and I'll be back. I just need to go regulate my nervous system. I'll be back. Because like you say, there are opportunities to control this, but we don't feel entitled or empowered to ask for what we need, let alone think about what we need. And like the system around us is not set up to be helpful in this way, to help us to feel regulated. Yeah.
Well, this is what we were coaching on in Dear Darling last night, because we had somebody who's come in, she's like planning to do her exams, well, she's got her exams coming up soon, and she was just coming down so hard on herself in this like significant stress state because she had so many other things going on in her life, as well as being like, I need to do more study, I need to do more study, I need to be preparing, I need to be doing this. Like, she's got like the exam is enough, let alone having these other things going on in your life. And she's here in like a stress state of like 4 or 5 and being like, why won't you study more? Like, come on, let's go. And for doctors to be able to recognize that the first priority, like if you want to be able to study, if you want to actually sit down, focus and be productive, the first thing you need to do is get yourself out of that level 4 or 5. That's the first thing you need to do. Same with like if you want to go and like see difficult patient cases, if you just finish your water and then you've got important stuff to do afterwards. If you identify that you're at like a 3, 4 or 5, the first thing, your number one priority should be getting back to a 2. Right? And that might actually even just mean like taking a break, giving your mind a break from those like racing and circling thoughts that are perpetuating that stress. It doesn't even necessarily need to be a shake it off kind of response, but like those moments of peace and stillness in your mind can bring you back down that stress scale. And so I love that idea that you've brought, Christine, of like, I wish this could be like, can we normalize this in the hospital system, that one of the first things we check in with before we go and try and do anything really important and impactful, significant for our patients or for ourselves or otherwise with our colleagues, to be able to recognize like, am I in a functional state or am I like a 4 or 5 where like I'm not going to potentially be able to execute this in the way that I want to and in the way that is important to? It breaks my heart to see this member trying to crack the whip on herself when she's at a level 4 or 5 stress. Like, there's no benefit to it, and the pain of that and the struggle you feel of trying to sit down and study when you've got that in your body. Like, I'm sure you see this in all the people you work with, not all the people, in a lot of the people you work with, Christine, in trying to support people through their BPT exams.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, yeah, when you're sitting your exams, I'm sure so much of this resonates, but also that kind of like feeling that you can't fix it or it doesn't apply to you as well, I think is also something I think a lot of them would feel. But I think it is powerful to know that you have more control than you think you do. But you know what I was also thinking about? I just wanted to ask, is this a cultural thing? Because I feel like coming from the UK, like whenever there's a crisis, whenever you're feeling a bit off, we just put the kettle on and make a cup of tea. And I'm talking about cardiac arrest, let's put the kettle on. Do you know what I'm saying? Let's have tea, emergency tea. And I don't think that that's an Australian thing. I know that I've offered tea to people and they just looked at me like, what is wrong with you? Why would tea help me in this situation? But if you're from the UK, you might resonate with the fact that tea fixes everything. But is that an Australian thing? Or like,
That's
UK
so amazing.
thing?
No, we're like more like a she'll be right, mate. Ignore like how significant the problem is. Like, pretend the problem is like smaller than it is, and then just like get on with it like it's no big deal. I feel like that's more Australian. Like, don't be acopic. Don't make a big deal.
Yeah. And tea will not help me, you crazy lunatic. Yeah. But I think
But it's not the tea, is it? It's the space. It's the break. It's like the stepping back and winding back down when you've noticed yourself wound up.
yeah, and it is powerful. I find that culturally, obviously, I was raised that way. But I guess this has been such an important conversation, and I hope for everyone listening, I know that you can resonate with times in your life where you did bubble up to a 2 on the stress level, but then tipped over into the 4 or 5, cried, lost it like I did. Like, I think we can all resonate with being constantly challenged in terms of our nervous system, even on just a typical Tuesday, never mind on a big special day when something awful happened. And so I think that this is an important message. And I actually, if you do work in a hospital where your nervous system is placed, you know, where it's supposed to in terms of the hospital system's priorities, and this is natural culture for you, we'd love to hear from you in the comments below. But also let us know if you think that this is something that you'd love to spread around. Share this podcast with anyone you think would benefit, because I think it is an idea worth sharing. And I think if this was to become more mainstream in terms of the way they approach working themselves, but also the way they approach their colleagues. And like you say, Beck, not seeing crying as a weakness, just being like, oh, they spilled over. Oh, we need to manage that and help that person in this way, and not seeing them as something's wrong with them, which obviously gets put across to the person. We get that message as doctors when something like that happens. That's the messages I got, was there was something wrong with me. And so I think it's great to be celebrating ourselves for like this beautiful innate part of it that actually is doing challenging things all the time, and it's any wonder we don't cry more. Do you know what I mean, in these situations? So yes, I really hope that you guys listening have found this helpful and can really take this with you in whichever way resonates.
We get so many heartfelt thank yous from our fellow doctors for having these vulnerable conversations on this public podcast. If you want to say thank you too, we would be most appreciative if you left our podcast a review. Reviews actually mean everything to us because they're what make the platform share this podcast with all the other doctor humans. And our mission is to make as many doctor humans as we can reach feel more human. Just go to the podcast app, click on the show, and find the option to review. The other way you can help us is just by sharing the podcast with someone in your life who you know will say, thank you for saying that, or tagging us on social media. And if you're in healthcare looking for speakers for your next event, or professionals who actually get it to facilitate the vulnerable conversations our teams of doctors need, request us through podcastfordoctors@gmail.com.